another insightful episode of Me and My Health Up. I'm your host, Anthony Harcher, a clinical nutritionist and lifestyle medicine specialist. I'm excited to share this conversation I recently had with Nadine Shaw on her podcast, Life, Health, and the Universe. Nadine and I have had the pleasure of connecting a few times over the past year on her podcast to explore the deep interconnections between health, spirituality, and our conscious awareness. In this latest discussion, we really dive deep into some fascinating territory. We discuss topics like epigenetics, the limitations of the medical system, and how cultivating gratitude and love can unlock our body's innate healing potential. Nadine and I also explore the role of habits, thoughts, and beliefs in shaping our physical, mental, and spiritual well-being. This is a thought-provoking conversation that challenges us to expand our understanding of the mind-body connection. Whether you're on a journey of personal growth or simply curious about the mysteries of the mind, body, and spirit, I believe you'll find a lot of value in what Nadine and I discuss. So sit back, get comfortable, and join us as we explore the incredible interconnectedness of life, health, and the universe. I hope you enjoy this conversation.
Today, we're joined again by Anthony Harcher. So, Anthony, welcome. Good to have you here again.
Thanks, Nadine. Thanks for having me on. I really look forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. So, when I went back through to look at when we recorded last, we had our first interview back in September last year, so pretty much 12 months ago, and then we did a follow-up about 6 weeks after that, I think. So the time's gone pretty quickly, but I touched base with you in July, I think. So a couple months ago, by the time this comes out, it'll be a couple months with this question. So I'm going to read the email that I sent you and we'll get stuck in. Okay, where are we? So I feel like we have so many things, so many common interests, and love the energy that you bring to the conversations. I'm particularly curious to discuss how health and spirituality interconnect. I feel like we have both been going on our own spiritual explorations, and I'm keen to discuss your experiences, especially coming from the health space and the evolution that you've experienced. If you're keen, let me know and I'll send you a booking link. So here we are. You were keen. You said yes to the invitation. And here we are. So not a little topic, but so obviously the podcast is called Life, Health, and the Universe. So I have this, feeling of the interconnectedness of all things, stories, health, and esoteric wisdom. But it's like, if someone asks me, well, what's the podcast about? It's like, I just want to sort of explore the threads of how those things interconnect and how you and I have come from the health space and different areas of the health space actually, and come to this intersection where spirituality is a part of that thing, the thing we do. So over to you. Oh, and by the way, listeners, we're co-hosting today. So this is, we're just kind of going to riff off of each other and see where the conversation takes us.
Yeah. So for me, spirituality growing up was religion, right? So I was brought up a Catholic and followed the Catholic path of religion. And it's through, I guess, the years of becoming wiser and more educated, I realized spirituality is more than religion. And religion, doesn't matter what religion you are, that they all have a commonality. In a sense, they believe in a higher order. And in essence, for me, the best connection with spirituality is being the most authentic version of myself. And I think that's where we connect deeply is at that authentic level where we're just being ourselves. And I ultimately realized and discovered that I'm just going to be the best version of myself. And that is therefore the best spiritual expression that I can be, is when I'm myself and being the best version of myself. And so in order for me to be the best version of myself, I need to look after myself. I need to do things that are going to allow me to be the best version of myself. And that's obviously doing or putting the right things in my mouth, breathing fresh air, and being my most conscious self, because ultimately we're interconnected. We have this interconnectedness through consciousness. And when we're our most conscious self, we're most interconnected. When we are less conscious, so mindless, we are very much in our animal brain, and we are all about ourselves. We're all about survival when we're stuck in the animal brain. But when we're in that transcendental area of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, and the prefrontal cortex is where I reside. It's my I, and it's where I'm most connected with the universe and feel interconnected. But it's where we get lowered into our animal mind, where we get fixated on the physical world and we lose touch with the spiritual world. So that's mindlessness. When we drop into the animal world, we just have this black and white thinking about, okay, am I going to survive? And I'm going to do my best effort to survive. And then because in survival mode, we're not thinking about our immortal being. We're not thinking about what we're going to leave in terms of a legacy. We're thinking about, I just want to survive in the here and now. And so I think generally with society, we generally get dragged into this animal brain through the media, social media, headlines, sensations, drama. And all this drama just makes us feel insecure. And so therefore we seek knowing, because we want to know if we're going to survive. But then that just drives more stuck in this animal space, and it doesn't allow us to step out of there and step into this high level of consciousness where we have this interconnectedness. It then shows how your podcast title allows for that interconnectedness. And I think what we're discussing today is how it's interconnected, and helping the listeners see that wisdom that you've come up with.
Yeah, that was one that just popped into my head straight down, it downloaded from the universe, that title, which is often when those things happen, right? That's 100%. Great. Well, you've kind of covered all bases. Like, I think that was like clear to understand, like where you say that we need to be the best version of yourself. You need to take care of all aspects of yourself, and your body and your health and what you put in your mouth and what you breathe are parts of that, because they're the human experience, right? So, where I was going to go with I'll kind of go with my introduction, and then I'll check my notes, because I wrote a whole bunch of things down that we could potentially talk about. So spirituality wise, I never really considered myself a spiritual person. My dad was, his parents were Christian when he was growing up, so he had to go to church every Sunday. And when he grew up and had kids, he was like, that was a bloody waste of time. We're not doing that anymore. My eldest sister was christened, and he was like, that was a bloody waste of time. Right. So we went to Church of England school, and we learned the basics, about all of the Christian things, and went to church on festivals, harvest, Easter, Christmas. But as I grew up, I was kind of like a bit anti-religion. And that's kind of where I always thought of spirituality and, those two things being the same, really. In more recent times, I think, like, for me, and I still kind of grapple with that idea of, like, if someone says, are you a spiritual person? Just because I still have those kind of thoughts around it. But for me, it's like, yes, I am. And I think we all are, when we go back to who we truly are. And that matches with your, description of authenticity. But it's like our interconnectedness with all things, with nature as a whole and with the universe as a whole. Because yes, in our everyday lives, as you explained perfectly, we're in that, like, we just got to go to work, do the things, follow the rules, follow the systems, and we don't think about it. But when you think about it and you know, look around you and you look up at the stars at night, or like the fact that there's actually planets that we can see, we're part of that. It's not like we're here on Earth and, you know, the sky's over there. We're part of this bigger whole. And for me, that's what spirituality is. But yeah, I'm kind of, so that, I guess that's my description of it. But I wanted to talk about that intersection of the health and spirituality, and like, where do they meet? Because we've definitely discussed a few things in our previous podcasts about this, and I've just been letting it tick over in my head. Do you want me to kind of drop in with one of the things, like, and where I kind of go, yeah, here's some interconnectedness, and this is pretty basic stuff, but I'm going to use a couple of different people who work in different areas that I've come across. And they're James Clear, who is all about habits. What's his book called? Atomic Habits.
Yeah.
Author of Atomic Habits. He's all about habits, okay, and how we can use habits to our advantage. Then we've got Joe Dispenza, who is, I don't even know how to describe him, but he's a meditation master. And he's got a book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. So we start to see the interconnectedness. There's some interconnectedness there of like, yes, habits can be used for good or bad. Habits can be used to create health. But habits can also move us away from our spirituality or our potential. I don't know if that's, I don't know. I didn't really leave a question mark with any of that. It was more like there's you start to see those connections, those threads coming together. How I can use these things, I can understand how to form habits in my health, but then I can understand how to break habits down in my, what did you call it? The mammalian brain?
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. It's that limbic center, the mammalian brain, and
where you're just in that kind of everyday cycle of doing the same thing without even thinking about it.
Correct. And that's where we have the addictive habits. It's where we're trying to seek pleasure without pain, and we see them as separates. But ultimately, once you walk down the spiritual path, you see pain and pleasure always together. They're interconnected. They're one. And so with that animal mammalian part of the brain, it's very much black and white. It's I'm seeking pain, avoiding pain. But,
some people might be seeking it.
And so they think they can, they live this illusion that we can live life without pain and only pleasure. But as you walk down the spiritual path, you realize that they're one, essentially, and always one. And it's only when we're in our animal part of the brain is where we get this perception, and it's a delusion, is that we just see the pleasure without the pain. However, what happens over time is that they become aware of the pain. So, for example, for the listeners, so when someone buys something on credit, for example, so you go to the shops and you buy this amazing $5,000 handbag, and you've got the handbag in your hand and you're walking around with this Gucci handbag and you feel amazing and everyone's commenting on your Gucci handbag. And so you think it's just all pleasure. However, then the end of the month comes and you get the statement from the bank saying that you've got $5,000 owing on your credit card.
Ouch.
And so then you become aware of the pain. And so this is how banks have been able to get us to consume credit, because we get fixated on one side, which is pleasure, what we want, and then we become aware of the pain later on. And so their ability to separate the two has been in their favor, but to the detriment of the consumer. Hence why we tend to overconsume debt. So this is what if we're not consciously aware, this is the bank's commercial model, it is to think that we can live in a delusional world of, pleasure without pain. It often, catches up with us once we become aware that, no, they're totally one and they're never separated. We just have this misperception that they were. So that's probably where, like, in terms of, I guess Joe Dispenza and James Clear, is that James Clear is just purely talking about how habits are created and how to create new ones, whereas Joe Dispenza's talking at that more higher esoteric level, which is that full integration, as you've been talking about spirituality is that we all one, we're not separate. And so so I guess they're talking on two different planes, different levels.
Yes. But it's kind of interesting because they talk about the same things, right? But James Clear talks about like why habits are so good, and Joe Dispenza's like he doesn't say the habits are bad, but how we can get caught up in this practice of, or not even a practice, well, the benefit of habits from James Clear's perspective and like scientifically is that we don't have to think about it once it's integrated into our lives. And so, for example, doing 10 push-ups every day, 10 push-ups every day after you go to the toilet, after a while, when you find the right spot for it, it just becomes habitual. You don't even think about it. You forget that you've done it, kind of thing. It's like driving. When you first get in the car, you have to try and learn how to do it, but then it becomes habitual. And so that's beneficial from James Clear's perspective. But Joe Dispenza says we become so accustomed to doing all of those things, including the thoughts that we have, that they become habitual. And those thoughts, this is probably a good segue into another kind of interconnected thing. Those thoughts govern how we experience the world and our life. And so he talks about becoming more consciously aware of those things so that we can then start to break them down and reprogram.
Yeah,
which kind of goes back to James Clear, where you're breaking things down and reprogramming. So
yeah. So James Clear is very much talking to the masses in terms of, I guess, the majority of society that's stuck in the animal brain that are just thinking it's all about changing habits and, dumping old ones, creating new ones. Whereas I guess Joe Dispenza is at a totally different level in the spiritual realm and talking about oneness. So with habit formation, like habits can serve us or not serve us. And, if you're looking at the Joe Dispenza world, you really need to know your spiritual path. You need to understand what's your mission and purpose on being on planet Earth. And I think a lot of people are unaware or they become unaware because they don't, I guess, think for themselves in a sense, because they're questioning enough and they're not asking enough questions and, have I guess their mind's shutting down. And so I think in order to get to where Joe Dispenza is requires a completely open-minded and be willing to question and learn and really have that transcendental mindset. Whereas with James Clear, he's just, he's nailed it with a book that appeals to the masses. But in saying that, like Joe Dispenza's work obviously will set people on a spiritual path that will ultimately lead them to a more fulfilling life. Whereas I guess James Clear is just feeding that merry-go-round. And people are still lost. Whereas Joe Dispenza is really helping people find the light, see the light, and keep that vision. Whereas, I guess James Clear is just helping, I guess, feed the merry-go-round where people will go from habit to habit, but really continue to be lost and not find their spiritual path. So that's how I distinguish the two. And I think people initially will embrace James's clear work because it's more understandable, it's more tangible. Over time, if they continue down this path, they will start to embrace Joe Dispenza's work and go down that more spiritual path, because ultimately the physical world is only 0.00001% of reality, and the spiritual world or the quantum world makes up 99.9999999%. So so ultimately, if you're wanting to know and sort of attached to physical things, then you get stuck in the physical world. Obviously, if you want to look beyond the physical world and explore the spiritual world, then that's stepping into Joe Dispenza's realm of realizing that we have unlimited potential and infinite ability to grow. So, but in the physical world, we see limitations and we get attached. And as you said, our thoughts become quite limiting, whereas we let go of our thoughts and become one and see all possibilities, or unlimited possibilities when we step into Joe Dispenza's world.
Yeah. But they've got to exist together, because we live in the body, right? Which is kind of like, where we're at. Taking care of the three-dimensional human that we are, the human experience, but having this also, expansive consciousness. Yeah, they need to come together. So let me ask you this question. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? The health or the, health or spirituality, consciousness, what do we call it? Does it matter what comes first? These are just kind of like, go with whatever one. Do you think that because of your journey with in the health space, it's led you to become a more spiritual being and to delve into those kind of other areas of life?
I actually think it's more my curiosity and wanting to learn. And because if I think about health, people really get fixated on the physical aspects of health in terms of the way they look, wanting to be youthful, wanting longevity. And I have never really, I've done health, but not for those reasons. So I've never been fixated on my physical appearance. Like I never tried to stop my hair loss, for example. People get really scared and phobic about losing their hair, and they
all
do
going
everything.
Grey.
Yeah, exactly. And so that for me, I just let that go from a very early age. It didn't really, it didn't worry me. And then same with my physical appearance. I've never sought to be, or I've never done the gym or resistance training to have a six pack or to have big biceps or guns or anything like that. I've never done it for that reason. And so for me, health's always about being healthy in a sense of just wanting to look after myself. And then it was the curiosity that ultimately led to going down the more spiritual path. And I guess just circling back to James Clear, and as you were saying, they have to coexist. And absolutely, you're right. And people will discover either one depending on where they're at and what they're looking for. So, and really form a bond or a connection with either leader in their space based on where they're at in their growth and journey. So, and in terms of habits, absolutely, like our body automatically breathes, our heartbeat automatically beats. And so the majority of our physical being just is in autopilot. So and thank God we don't have to consciously breathe and consciously, control our heart and all that. So it enables us to, have this level of consciousness that can then focus on, I guess, bigger things such as this topic of conversation. So, so for me, in terms of the chicken and the egg, which one comes first? Well, it ultimately depends on where the listener's at in their journey. So for me, I'm not worried about which one comes first because you can have a case for and against both of them in terms of and ultimately for me, I'm pursuing both paths in terms of looking after my physical health and doing what I can, and also wanting that spiritual growth. And so I certainly don't see myself separate in terms of my physical and spiritual presence, other than I'm always seeking to do what I can to expand my awareness in this area, follow Joe Dispenza's work and other greats in this area, and continue to grow and develop and have these conversations to help others grow and develop.
Yes. Yeah. Interestingly, I was talking to someone the other day and they said, oh, how's the podcast going? And it was just as I'd emailed you. And he said, I just wanted to sort of say, this is my translation. It's all very well, life, health, and the universe. But when people are like, he didn't use the word stressed, but it was almost like caught up in the everyday, it's almost impossible to do these things. And I get it. However, there's another part of me that's like, well, actually, there's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do that's free that you don't need. You don't need to be a consumer. You don't to like move your body, to go for a walk. You don't need to be a consumer to open up your consciousness or to take some moments in stillness. So I was interested to he suggested that the things that we're doing are luxuries that not everyone is entitled to or is able to do.
Well,
what do you reckon?
I
strongly disagree.
Correct. However, in saying that, I see it from his point of view, because when you're stuck in that mentality and only see a lot of limitations, and then you start to hear us speak or Joe Dispenza speak, they see it as not tangible, because it's so distant, because they're so stuck in their world. They don't see unlimited possibilities. They don't see their ability to be able to step out of the rat race and to become a Nadine and doing a podcast and talking about spirituality and sharing that it can be done at zero cost. There's no cost associated with it. It's ultimately understanding your spiritual path and doing what's most important to continue on your spiritual path. I think part of the reason why people think they're stuck is that they're doing what they think they're supposed to do. So they're in this conformance, and they can't break this conformance mentality. And it's a very much a herd mentality. And it's a mentality that the government wants you to be in, because otherwise they can't control the masses. Otherwise we have chaos and anarchy. And it's the same as religious organizations. They want to have the power over you so that you stay believing that they are the only way in which you can see the light. And so therefore, that they've got some control over you, and they can control large groups of people. And so ultimately they share this delusion on us, or they preach this delusion on us that we are reliant on them and we have some dependence on them. And they always want us to feel that way, that it's out of our control. We don't, ultimately we need their help. And so they're constantly setting up systems and, I guess, policies around us thinking that we need them. And so, and then we become attached and thinking, and we do, we become attached to the NDIS, we become attached to Social Security, we become attached to handouts, and we become attached to the medical system and consumerism. Yes, 100%. And ultimately the government likes that because they have some control, because they can say, well, if you don't conform, I'm going to pull it away from you. And it's the same as sending our children to daycare. If you don't get your children vaccinated, you can't claim the benefits off us. And so there's lots of parents that were very stuck in the conundrum thinking, yes, I want the benefit, but I don't really want my children vaccinated. And so what do I do? And so this is the whole coercive control by the government. And it's how religious organizations control the masses too, is through setting up these rules that are ultimately unattainable, and we always fall short of them. And so therefore we think we need the spiritual organization in order to get enlightened or in order to go to heaven. Whereas in fact, they just set this system up so that we can't actually meet the meet the so-called 10 commandments, for example, and that and we then think, and we're sinners, and therefore if we remain sinners we're going to go to hell, but if we ask for forgiveness, then and that's conforming to the church and following their rules, then I'll go to heaven. So it's like, and if I don't contribute to the plate every week, then that's not a good thing, because I'm not contributing to the church, and therefore I'm going to go to hell. And this is how they maintain their organizations and contain that coercive control. So I think I've sort of gone on a bit of a tangent here. So
that's all right. Go for
it. It's helping the listener better understand the bigger picture and why they feel stuck at times. And it's often because of this puppet pulling by the government or religious organizations, that they feel that they're somewhat limited.
They're limited. Yeah, I thought that was a really good stuck and limited. They're really good words, I think, for that. And interestingly, I feel like the more connected I feel in a spiritual sense, or connectedness with the whole, the more I feel like those organizations that you spoke of, television, the news, the government, church, it's almost like drawing you away from your full potential. It feels to me, I can see like a deliberate, blindsiding, don't let them see it, because if they see it, they're going to be unstoppable kind of thing, right? So that's kind of interesting how that happens. And it happens when people, well, we can kind of see how those things we're cut off from our spirituality because of those things. We feel stuck and limited. But also when we're in that cycle, health also takes a hit in many ways, because we're watching advertising, we're getting sucked into what we want, that instant gratification that you were talking about, that doesn't serve us. And so there's that whole cycle that goes on as well. There's lots of, you start going, oh, and that, right?
Yeah, just add to that, Dr. John DeMartini shares, if you don't empower yourself in all areas of life, you'll get or overpowered in that area, right? And that's ultimately where people feel, because they don't empower themselves in all areas of their life, then they feel disempowered in a certain area and they feel controlled in that area. And if you fixate yourself on that, as you said about, your thoughts become your reality. If you then focus on, I'm dependent on the government for this, and therefore I'm stuck. I don't want to get off the NDIS because I'm getting these handouts. The minute I get off the NDIS, I'm going to lose this money. And so in essence, the government's got control over them, and they've got control over their health. And it's the same as our medical system. It's setting the people up for being disempowered, so that they ultimately don't want people to be empowered in their health, because that's another string that the government has over you to think that you need them. So, and again, that's where, like the whole drug companies, for example, don't have, and the medical system has no plan B to get the person off the drug, because the only way the drug companies can make money is to keep selling the drug. And so there's no plan B. And so the doctor will prescribe the drugs, but not talk about how they're going to get that person off the drug. Their job is done once they prescribe the drug, and they're free of all liability once they prescribe the drug. And so the person takes the drug and feels that they feel disempowered and that they need the drug, and they become dependent on the drug. And it's getting back to these addictions and James Clear's around habits and all these sort of things. And once you start having these dependencies and it starts forming habits, then in essence, you're not seeking to empower that area any further, because it's the symptoms have gone for now. I don't need to worry about it anymore. But if you're saying no to the drug, then you've got to look for other avenues. You've got to explore the universe for all possibilities as to what else I can do. And that's seeking a journey of empowerment. And then once you realize there's so many other options other than the drug, for example, the drug is 0.00001% of options. And then in terms of what is accessible to you is 99.999% of all possibility in terms of other avenues other than the drug to cure yourself. And so this ultimately, I mean, it's all intertangled, but I just really wanted to share with the listeners as to why they may feel stuck. And it's, if in order to break this feeling stuck, what I encourage the listeners to do is start empowering themselves and educating themselves in the areas they feel disempowered. So if they feel disempowered in health, and this is the same as like, I'll just finish that. If you feel disempowered with health, then start getting educated in health, and then you'll start to feel empowered. For example, in relationships, when someone feels disempowered in a relationship, of course, the other person is going to be called a narcissist because they have the power, right? So, but in order to make it a level playing field and to have equality in relationships, you need to empower yourself in relationships. And so, again, if you're feeling that you're in a narcissistic relationship, time to start leveling up by seeking empowerment, by getting educated on relationships, discovering yourself. And so if you go on that self-discovery, you start working on yourself, then you'll find that you start to have a voice. You can start speaking out because you have more confidence. You're starting to reassure yourself. And often in this disempowerment in relationships is insecurities, and they come from childhood. So if you work on those insecurities from childhood, you'll start to strengthen your inner voice, and then you'll be able to speak your voice to your partner and have more equality. And again, if you're feeling that you're limited and stuck with your finances, your financial position, go and get educated. Or if you're not really wanting to get educated, then you've got to be willing to pay for help and pay an expert in that area. And that's not a get rich quick scheme. It's actually finding a qualified expert that can actually empower you, educate you with your finances and how to better manage them. And so, again, there's other areas of life that we ultimately want to empower. But if you don't empower these other areas, then you're going to be controlled in that area by someone else.
And well, there's a couple of different things I could, there's lots of different things I could could say about that. But one thing about that, there's that phrase where your attention goes, the energy flows, right? And that's kind of like a universal law. For good or bad. And so, if you're going for empowerment, then putting your full attention on something and bringing energy to it can help to heal it, process it, and make it something that on that continuum of bad or good is moving more towards good. But again, it's kind of like that interconnection of 3D and universal consciousness. Another thing that I thought of, when you were talking about this disempowerment, and we were sort of saying that it can lead to, I think I said it could, it leads to health problems. Well, there's a couple of different ways I'd like to go with this. But interestingly, as a health practitioner, when people start living in these, limited mindsets, experiencing disease, stress, one of the things that we get them to do is meditate. I think that's where my interconnection started to come in more, because it was like breath work, meditation as a way of relaxing and dropping down out of the stress state, rest and digest, out of the fight or flight. So interestingly, meditation's a recommendation that we might use for someone who is trying to improve their health because of stress. Okay, let's epigenetics, because again, this is your thoughts control your reality, but this can actually be related to your health. But it's kind of like an energetic thing, right? So I'm sure that a lot of the people listening have heard of epigenetics, but we absolutely would have heard of genetics, because for a long time it was like we were basically following in the footsteps of our forefathers and foremothers when it came to what we were going to experience especially when it came to health, right? So I'll give you an example. When I turned 45, I went to the doctor and he was like, "Oh, you need to have a 45-year, health check," which I didn't do. But I was like, why? Like, I'm in pretty good nick. Like, I'm pretty, like, there's nothing going on. I was actually there because my little girl was unwell. And he was like, "Oh, well, have your parents had, this? Have your grandparents had this?" And I was like, "Yeah, my dad's had this and my mum's had this and my grandfather had type 2 diabetes, lifestyle related, blah, blah." He was like, "Oh, well, you're high risk," kind of thing. Genetics, because of my genetics. But we now know, and I think that people still believe that that's the case, right? Oh, I heard someone say just the other day, bad knees run in my family. What? I shouldn't laugh. But epigenetics is a discovery that was made by Bruce Lipton, I think. And in fact, his book is called The Biology of Belief, because he found that cells actually change depending on their environment, including our thoughts, because our thoughts produce chemicals, reactions in our body. Those chemical reactions produce illness or wellness.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Yeah.
So that's kind of like a health in the universe thing, isn't it?
It totally is, because the medical system will want you to believe the genetic, because you're disempowered totally. Like, so it's saying, well, I'm destined. So this is my destiny, is to follow my parents, my ancestors, and therefore I need your drug. I need your solution. So whatever your solution is, give it to me, because I don't want to end up like my grandparents and ancestors. However, those seeking empowerment will realize, no, that's only, again, a very small portion of the truth, and it doesn't govern our destiny. So when we look at the universe, we know that there's unlimited possibilities. And if we want to, as you said, where we focus our attention, our energy flows. And so if we focus that it's on genetics, then we'll look and find more and more support that it's all about genetics, and that and therefore we find more evidence that our thinking is correct, and then we get hardwired into that thinking, and think, okay, I've got no option other than to take the drug or to get the test or whatever. However, because that we know that's not true. It's true in the case that we allow that gene to express itself through not looking after ourselves. And so we know that, okay, we've got the genetic potential, but we've also got unlimited possibilities. And so at the same time as, yes, we have that predisposition, it's a possibility, but it's not the only possibility. If I look after myself, then I can not allow that gene to express itself. And so what they are showing you in terms of your genetics is that you have this potential, but it hasn't yet expressed itself. You have control over whether it expresses itself. And so this is where the empowerment comes back to you, is that you can make the choices either to turn on that gene or to keep that gene switched off, and so that it never expresses itself. And so, as you said, Nadine, you've got this genetic predisposition or potential for all these particular pathways. And so if you started to then think, well, oh, shit, what's the point? I'm going to end up like my parents, so therefore I'm going to smoke, I'm going to drink, I'm going to party. Absolutely. Then the probability of that potential escalates. However, if you say, no, I'm in control of my health, I'm in control of my destiny, I'm going to continue to look after myself, then the probability becomes very low of the potential of that gene expressing itself. And so, yes, you are empowered. You can make the decisions to increase the probability in the favor that it doesn't happen, or you can do the converse or the contrary. So again, it really comes back to empowerment. And obviously the medical path is all about, disempowerment. So the doctor, the medical system has all the knowledge, and you have this belief that they know everything, which is not true. And ultimately, they've got a part truth in what they know, and there's an element of truth in what they know, but they don't know the whole truth, and they're not seeking to know the whole truth. Otherwise, they would be open to you exploring alternatives, given that they're
Yes.
dogmented
Yeah, good
and have this
point.
one-sided view that this is the only way, drugs or surgery. Therefore, they're ultimately not on a spiritual path. They're very much stuck in that my way or the highway, which is that animal, that mammalian brain, and getting stuck in there. And so I think I've probably spoken a lot to your point. Is there anything else you wanted me to discuss? Did I miss anything?
No, I don't think so. I think that it's a very interesting, connection that we can see between our health and spirituality when we know that, again, we talk about energetically, or how our thoughts can produce, that chemical reaction in our body that can feed disease. And that also links back with Joe Dispenza as well. He's done extensive testing on lots of people when they're in a meditative state. And they've done blood work and seen how the blood work changes within the period of when their brain waves change and that sort of thing. So it's a thing.
Absolutely, Nadine. And just on that point, is that when you're in a meditative state, you're in that realm of unlimited possibilities. And so the body is in a total balanced state. And therefore, that the chance of, I guess, that medical belief that, the genetics is going to express itself is so low. It is extraordinarily low, because you've tapped into the 99.99% of all possibilities.
All the other possibilities.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
And although I know Joe Dispenza has people that have done it, cured themselves from extraordinary illness, what we would have probably called, 30 or 40 years ago, miracles, right? Because they believed in a different potential for themselves. It doesn't happen to everyone. And in fact, it seems that kind of dramatic shift into a new reality for a human often comes at a point of crisis, health crisis. So I thought that might be a good one to talk about. Have you got?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So totally. It's where the person hasn't prioritized their health, and, they've sort of focused on other areas of their life, and they've become very empowered in the other areas of life and got great results. And, whether it's business or it's in, I don't know, social connection, they're out partying all the time, and, they're increasing their, certainly their social connection. And then therefore they're not doing health, and therefore their health deteriorates, and ultimately it wakes them up. So that health scare wakes them up to make them realize that, hey, in order for you to continue, you need to do something in this area. Otherwise, you're going to continue on a downhill spiral based on what you're currently doing. So it certainly wakes them up to what they're doing is not serving their health and well-being, or that they're just not putting enough attention to their health and well-being. And so often, and that will happen to people that don't have a high value or high priority on health. However, those that have a high priority and high value on health, it's unlikely that will happen, because they are constantly prioritizing their health and doing things that serve them. However, they can get caught up in certain organizations, such as, whether it be veganism, or they get very much into like a cult or a belief system, thinking that what they're doing is the ultimate path to health and well-being. However, it is myopic. It is, quite, and again, I'm not criticizing anyone that's a vegan. It's more just waking them up that there's other areas of health and well-being that need focus as well. So it's not just all about what you put in your mouth. As you are aware, there's the sleeping element, there's managing stress. And so you could have a perfectly great diet, and I see plenty of people that come to me with a textbook diet, like they tick all the boxes, but they're sick. And the reason why they're sick is because they're either not, they're overstressed and their body's not doing the regeneration work. As you said, the rest and digest system is always switched or predominantly switched off. They're not getting sleep, or, they're out taking recreational drugs or whatever it might be, that they haven't looked at the holism around health. It's not just the myopic focus of just doing one thing. We need to be looking at the whole health in order to maximize our potential for an alternate other than the genetic predisposition.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that when someone is in a health crisis, how it can change their attitude, especially when it comes to what's important, right? And, appreciating the simple things in life, let's say. But you also hear stories of, people in health crisis literally on their, like I heard a podcast with someone, I can't remember where it was. And it was a woman who now teaches about spirituality. I'm not sure. I can't remember what specifically she does, but she was like stage 4 cancer on life support, family there waiting to say goodbye, kind of like, lost heaps of body weight, like was basically a skeleton in a bed, unconscious. And she had a spiritual experience where, she was basically given the decision whether she was to come back and do something with her life and to change her life dramatically, or whether she was to pass over. And she came back. And not only did she come back, but she came back and left the hospital like a month later with no cancer. With that, when they'd said nothing else is going to work. Have you heard that? Have you heard that? Yeah. 100%. Amazing.
The body has innate programming on how to heal. It knows what to do. We've got to allow it the capacity to heal, and part of that process is the want to, that the belief that I want to heal, and therefore, as you said, where our thoughts go, our energy flows. And so therefore you provide the energy to healing. And the body is very good at doing what it needs to do to heal. It's just, in terms of where, I guess, the choices we make. In a sense, some people in that situation just give up, think, what's the point? And obviously they'll continue to spiral and decay, whereas she chose the light and, and sought enlightenment. And that obviously gave her the strength and the energy to heal.
Yeah, amazing. We're pretty close to the hour now, Anthony. What was I going to say about that? I guess, so it would be good to try and conclude. I think we've come to some good realizations, or some, created some connections when it comes to health and spirituality. And I think that, in fact, I know that you have an online course that's called Mindful Mindset, right? And I don't reckon that we can deny the connection between mindfulness and like having a positive mental attitude. I don't think we can. I think we can conclude that is connected to spirituality. Would I be? Yes. Or like universal consciousness, the quantum,
yes,
right?
It is.
Yeah, and so we connect mindfulness and mindset with health a lot. It has a massive connection, like the decisions we make around and the choices we make, and so on. There you go, solve the problem for the world. Yeah, so I think that, and like through our conversation, we've kind of shown that there is great power in our thoughts. The energetics behind it. Have you got anything to say on that? I know that you also work with mental health, right? So like how, and that I guess that might be touching on something slightly different, because often people with mental health can have imbalance, like chemical imbalances or hormonal imbalances.
Yeah, like obviously there is that element, but it's, as you said earlier in the episode, that our thoughts create these, whether chemicals, it's stress hormones or stress neurotransmitters. And so our thinking can do that, can imbalance And so it's not necessarily a set point. It's not they're fixated or stuck there. If they believe they are, then yes, they'll remain stuck there. But if they open themselves to unlimited possibilities, yes, their body can auto-correct the imbalance. It doesn't need a drug. We can change our thinking. And I guess that's where you're going to, is that we have the ability to, create better thoughts about ourselves, or have a better, we'll be more open to a better understanding of the world, and I guess an openness to hearing what we had to say today. And in essence, that their body knows how to restore homeostasis. It's an innate ability. Yeah.
And anything, I guess, that isn't homeostasis, like when we're not in balance, is because there's something going on that's creating that imbalance, not because we're not capable of finding it.
Correct.
That's not to say that it's necessarily an easy journey, because we have to really delve into those the darker sides of ourselves. And going back to what you said earlier about that being on a continuum, like it's not like you're either healthy or you're not. Like that's a continuum. Yeah, you're either conscious or you're unconscious. That's when it comes to spirituality, it's a continuum. Yeah. And so sometimes you have to go into the more uncomfortable aspects, not to get rid of them, or not because you're bad, or not because it's wrong, but just so that you can see what's going on. And that's your, staying curious.
And I think it probably leads to this sort of point, that the ultimate healers are love and gratitude. And so ultimately, love and gratitude are oneness. So it's being grateful for the way things are, not the way you wish they ought to be. So again, we typically do gratitude towards things that have been supportive to us, but it's ultimately finding gratitude and grace to the things that haven't been supportive to us. And this is where we become one. And ultimately, love is unconditional. And so it's loving everyone, everything. And once we're in that aligned state, then our body absolutely has unlimited potential, healing potential. And so I think ultimately that's where people want to take what we've discussed today, is seeking more love, gratitude, and enlightenment. Ultimately, that's where this conversation has hopefully taken the listeners.
Yes, yeah, I agree. And that's a brilliant note to finish on. I can't remember exactly what it was that I heard, but it was along the lines of when you're in gratitude, you can't feel hate. Yeah, you can only feel love.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So, that's a really perfect ending to the conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time today. I love our chats and some of the rabbit holes we were able to go down together. So thank you so much for joining me, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Thank you, Nadine, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in.
Yeah, thank you, listeners.
Yeah.
Podcast disclaimer. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it do not constitute medical, healthcare, or professional advice and are provided for general information purposes only. All care is taken in the preparation of the information in this podcast. Connected Wellness Proprietary Limited, operating under the brand me&my Health Up, does not make any representations or give any warranties about its accuracy, reliability, completeness, or suitability for any particular purpose. This podcast and any information, advice, opinions, or statements within it are not to be used as a substitute for professional, medical, psychological, psychiatric, or any other mental health care or healthcare in general. me&my Health Up recommends you seek the advice of a doctor or qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Inform your doctor of any changes that you may to your lifestyle and discuss these with your doctor. Do not disregard medical advice or delay visiting a medical professional because of something you hear in this podcast. This podcast has been carefully prepared on the basis of current information. Changes in circumstances after publication may affect the accuracy of this information. To the maximum extent permitted by the law, me&my Health Up disclaims any such representations or warranties to the completeness, accuracy, merchantability, or fitness for purpose of this podcast, and will not be liable for any expenses, losses, damages incurred, indirect or consequential damages, or costs that may be incurred as a result of the information being inaccurate or incomplete in any way and for any reason. No part of this podcast can be reproduced, redistributed, published, copied, or duplicated in a form without prior permission of me&my Health Up.